Good morning and welcome to the Business Day Focus 4.0 live digital dialogue in partnership with Oracle. Today we're talking about, is your organization evolving to ensure long-term resilience? My name is Arthur Goldstuck. I run a company called Worldwide Works, and we conduct research into digital trends, and in particular at the moment, this exact issue. In the past year, we conducted research into remote working, which showed that 37% of South African companies were fully digitally transformed. And when we asked companies whether they would allow remote working once the pandemic ended, almost exactly the same percentage, 38%, said they would. But far more significantly, of those companies that were digitally transformed, a massive 70% reported increased productivity. Those that weren't digitally transformed, only 29% improved productivity. So that shows the dramatic impact of having a digital strategy for longer term resilience. We're looking forward to seeing what the results are this year. But in the meantime, 12 months on, we're almost exactly a year into the pandemic. Working from home has evolved into a more formal and permanent remote workforce scenario. We talk about the new normal and the new abnormal, but it looks like this is going to be an evolving normal. And what we want to explore is the continued impact of managing a remote workforce, the importance for organizations to evolve through an effective digital transformation journey to prepare that workforce. It's not just about the company as a whole being productive, but about the workforce feeling that they are productive and making a contribution. I'm going to introduce the panelists shortly. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please put them in the live chat and we'll come back to them later in the session. But first, we're going to have an introduction, or setting the scene rather, by Rob Botma, Strategic Business Solutions Engineer at Oracle. He wrote a fascinating article recently about the need to empower managers to manage a remote workforce effectively. And there was one line that I found particularly significant in his article. And he said that resilience in an organization is usually built over time. But in times of crisis, organizations have to respond practically immediately. So it's now over to Rob.
Thank you, Arthur, and welcome to other panelists. Yeah, I think organizations have always evolved. What's happening today and what started last year with the pandemic is organizations were forced into this. And, there's this big discussion now around how do we survive and then thrive in this environment. So, if we look at in today's topic, from an organization's resilience point of view, exactly what you said there, Arthur. We in times of, there's an urgency in companies. When the pandemic started last year, everybody looked towards December. There was some sort of thought that 2020 was a terrible year. We're going to get to an end. We're going to get to January 2021, and we're going to get back to how things were. And I've stopped using this term, the new way of work, etc., because it's the way of work. This is how it's going to be. I was having a discussion with a colleague earlier this morning about, this is a virus. If you look at the vaccines, they're not there like other vaccines that get rid of the virus. Here we're trying to prevent certain illness and death in this. The virus is going to be around. So organizations have to evolve. They have to look and say, this is the environment we're going to be working in. How do we change? And then, also referring to that article, and my one feeling is that a group of people that have been hit hard by this are line managers. In my opinion, I think line managers, their HR function with performance management, goal setting, career development was always like a grudge purchase. They did something because HR told them to do it. It was never really done with true talent management. I'm not saying all of them, but by and large. Now they have to do it with a remote workforce. And I don't believe many of them have the skills. So to me, I'm saying to HR, that's your challenge in this new world, is you need to get line managers, give them the right skills. And I like to use the example of, sitting in an office environment to have that difficult discussion with an underperforming employee is difficult. Now you try and have that with an employee sitting at home with the dogs barking, children walking in and out of the room, and you're trying to have this. There's a skill set to do this. And I think our line guys, the line managers really, really need help. So, with that, let's open up the panel and start discussing, because there's so much to discuss in this, what organizations need to do in this evolving to become these resilient organizations to meet with the challenges of today.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. It really does set the scene. And we're going to now explore this topic further with yourself and our other panelists. I'd like to welcome Ronnie Tureen, who's HCM Sales Development and Strategy Leader for Oracle in Africa. And then two people who are really at the coalface of the issue we're talking about, Mandusha Dasrath, Performance and Reward Director of Tiger Brands, and Dr. Marzan de Klerk, Chief Advisor of the Leadership Faculty at ESCOM and a registered industrial and organizational psychologist. And I'm going to start with you, Mandusha. With the pandemic now approaching its second year, how has this forced your organization to evolve and adapt over the past year, but also with the intention of being ready for the next, the coming year, if it remains the same, or if you find that you have to continue with the entire remote working situation?
Thanks for that, Arthur. I think at Tiger, we were particularly fortunate as an organization. Tiger is a very proud organization. We're very proud of our South African heritage, being the largest FMCG food producer in the country. And when the pandemic hit us and the president announced the lockdown, I think what made it easier for us as a company to tackle the challenges was that great sense of wanting to serve. Our people rose to the challenge, which made it quite easy for the business to respond to the call that actually came through from the president. So, through the pandemic, the large part of our operations remained open and were functioning at that particular point in time. And we were very privileged in the sense that, we didn't have to deal with issues of people not coming to work and things like that, of people being afraid to come to work. Our people literally said, our country needs us, we will be there. They pitched up every single day to work. But with that being said, that's the very positive side, and we didn't have to force people to say, okay, you have to come to work and things like that. But the challenges we did have to deal with is that we have a large portion of our workforce that's also very much office-based, supporting our operations. And then what do we do with that particular workforce? And of course, we literally had to make plans very quickly to equip those employees to be able to work from home. But like Rob said in his opening, it was really about, so I go and work from home, and now what? Is working from home now I'm on a holiday? How do we equip our line managers? How do we equip our employees to say, well, what does this working from home mean to me? So we started off actually quite granularly in some of our people, because they're purely office-based, they had desktops. And now we had to get laptops, we had to source 3G cards, etc., to enable them to be able to work from home, to tell them what does, when you are working from home, what is a safe working environment? What are the do's and don'ts? What is meeting etiquette? Rob also spoke about the challenges of having the dogs barking and people walking about and things like that, So you deal with a very different set of challenges, and really trying, I think for us as an organization, we responded quite well to say, here are some tips and tools, etc. We transitioned very quickly to online learning platforms and equipped our people to say, okay, here's things you can do. We started, for example, sending out tips on a regular basis through various platforms to say, okay, today take 10 minutes and go and do this and go and do that, because what it does surface is also very different challenges. I think the long and the short of it is it did force us to stand up, take notice very quickly. But I think the thing that we've learned is that you have to be agile. This is evolving. You never know. I think there's no certainty in terms of what's going to happen next. So right now we're at the stage where you've got to build skills within your organization that will allow your people to be agile. So if I sum it up in one word, it's really about agility.
Mandisa, I like the fact that you also brought the idea of balance between home requirements and work requirements into the conversation. Our research, in fact, the same research I mentioned earlier showed that the most successful people working from home were those who were allowed to balance home and work needs, where they were allowed to spend little time with their children, but also have good connectivity. And we define that as a happy home, happy worker. And that's a perfect note in which to bring in Marzan. Marzan, looking at the continued working from home culture, how do you believe it's affecting the performance of employees, both mentally and emotionally?
Good morning, and thank you, Arthur, and thank you, panelists. I think this is a great opportunity for us to learn from one another. The key insight from what I've observed over the last couple of months is that people are really emotionally and mentally fatigued. So in the past, there were buzzwords to the effect of organizations are change fatigued, organizations are survey fatigued. And I think we're getting to a point where employees are becoming screen fatigued. They are in front of their laptop screens almost 7 days a week. Time has become fluid. So it's not an 8 to 5 job anymore. We work during the evenings. It's almost as if there's more on employees' plates to deal with. And it's almost as if employees have shifted from being human being to becoming human doing. It's just about getting stuff out, making sure we meet our targets. So there's a lot of strain on employees. And especially from the point that we work from in terms of leadership development, we had to literally pause, go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, what is it that our leaders need in this time in order to successfully lead virtually? It's not the same way that they led before. It's not about sitting around the boardroom table and having difficult conversations about operational performance, about integrating, about the way that we align and we integrate. It's now about how do we connect with each other virtually in order for us to move forward as a collective. So the first thing that we did is we started gathering anecdotal evidence from different leaders to understand the different challenges. We started partnering with different business schools to understand what is the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set that leaders need in order to operate differently. And we had to literally go back and redesign all our leadership development offerings. And as Mandisha said, the common theme that spans across all our development offerings has to do with resilience and agility. And the need for collaboration. Leaders, there's a difference between cooperating and coordinating, but it's really about collaboration and teaching in that skill of how do you do that on a virtual platform in order to create meaningful engagement, in order to ensure that employees become more agile in the way that they think and the way that they do. The one thing that we've realized that our leaders are trying to do is that they are trying to condense the time that meetings are. So instead of having a monthly 8-hour-long meeting to talk about performance, it's now condensed to 3 hours. So it's shorter bursts of conversations, even though the topic is more richer, the conversation points are shorter, but it's really to get to a point to say, so what are those things that we need to shift on in order to make a bigger impact? So it's almost been turned upside down. I heard an interesting quote the other day that I thought was so relevant, and I'm a big fan of the leadership guru Simon Sinek, and he said recently, the real evidence of leadership today is if you ask someone how are they doing and you actually care about the answer. And I think we need to get to a space where we have an organization that cares about their people again, and not just doing a tick box exercise to make sure that we meet certain requirements, but actually connecting with one another. And it takes a big shift, because it's really then coming back to say, so how do we shift back to human being and get the human doing at the back end, so that we can become more humane and connecting with employees across the different levels in the organization. Thanks, Arthur.
That's fascinating. And again, it emphasizes the human side of the whole remote working situation, and also how to keep people resilient. But you also need software tools and systems for that. And I'm going to bring in Ronnie Tureen now with his focus on human capital management systems and working with companies over the past year, selling, but also assisting with strategy. That must have given you incredible insights into the extent to which managers are equipped to manage their teams remotely. But do you believe they really are? Have they caught up? Has a year been enough? And if not, what steps and tools do you believe should be taken by HR to address that challenge?
Wow, lots of questions in one there, Arthur. Thanks. So the year has been an interesting year, and I think there's been a lot of learning that has actually happened over that time frame. I think in terms of equipping line managers specifically, as Rob alluded to, where the bulk of the problem is how am I actually managing the people? I think Mazan mentioned the fact that, we're looking at empathy as being one of those critical areas that they need to be focusing on. In terms of the tools, I believe that the tools have always been there. The problem with the tools is that they're not necessarily being used. What this pandemic has actually brought about is the fact that the tools that were available to you at the office now need to be moved away from the office. So the concept of mobility has taken a huge step forward in terms of how are we actually managing. And if I don't have that mobility capability, I think Mandusha was referring to the point that most of their office workers had desktops, and they now had to be provided with laptops so that they can work remotely. So I think from a tools perspective, the tools have always been there. They've never necessarily been used correctly. To the point that Rob was making a little bit earlier, it's something that I find a little bit contentious in that line managers, the expectation of line managers was that their part of their job is to do human resources and talent management as part of their role. But they've always shifted it back to HR and say, this is an HR responsibility, and they now need to take that on. And do they have the right tools to be able to do that? So from a systems perspective, do they have something that allows them to, first of all, be able to communicate with their employees on a regular basis? And as Mazan said, not long discussions, but short, brief, regular conversations with their employees on an ongoing basis. So that needs to be made available to them. The ability to actually look at your team and be able to see where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, and how do I actually manage that? So having visibility of a talent grid, for example, needs to be made available to line managers, not just to HR staff who look once a year or twice a year, however many times they do performance reviews and talent reviews for promotional purposes or bonuses or whatever the case may be. That function has moved down to line, where line needs to be looking at that with their subordinates. So those are the sort of things that are traditionally part of a line manager's job that has not necessarily always been done. And in order to provide them with the ability to do that, there are tools that need to be put in place. Talent review capabilities, the abilities to have conversations, to have those difficult conversations that Rob was talking about. But I think also from an employee's perspective, one of the things I remember the first couple of Zoom calls that I was on when we started this whole lockdown scenario, everybody was very excited. Hey, I don't have to sit in peak hour traffic every day. I can relax. I can spend more time with my family. And what has happened over the period of the year is that people have needed to learn to allocate certain times of the day to work, where they say, this is 8 o'clock, I'm going to get in my car, i.e. I'm going to take my slippers off and put my shoes on, and I'm going to go to the office and I'm actually going to do some work. And that mindset change needs to happen, not just from a line manager's perspective, but from an employee's perspective as well. So the tools are the one side of it, but I think the mental state of the individuals, whether they're line managers or whether they are employees, has to shift as well. So looking at, I have a Zoom meeting coming up, am I in a quiet area? Am I going to be disturbed, et cetera, et cetera? All of those things need to be taken into account so that you are actually performing at home in the same way that you would perform in a work environment. And those tools have to be mobile enabled.
Dusha, you were nodding at quite a few of those insights from Ronnie. So I imagine you're experiencing all of this within the organization. So let me put this to you. How should line managers be leading this transformational change in their teams and organizations?
I think for us as an organizations, our line managers have really very nicely stepped up to the challenge. So I think we were very privileged that we did start the journey in terms of creating online tools, etc. So talent reviews, performance reviews, etc. were being done online, and throughout the process, we very successfully managed a full performance review for the organization, talent review, and an annual salary review process very successfully. And I probably think in the years that I've been at the organization, probably one of our most successful years in actually doing that. But that's because I think over time, we started to put the building blocks in place. And what we were doing now was sort of if I could call it the bells and whistles, in the sense that the line managers had the tools, so they had access to the data. They knew how to conduct a performance discussion, how to have a courageous conversation, etc. But what was the key thing? You're working in a very different environment, and like the rest of the panelists have spoken about, it was about how do I deal with this when my employee is working remotely? How do I have that conversation? But I think I want to take it on a little bit of a different slant, because it's quite close to my heart. Is really about helping line managers to also deal. I think what helped them to deal with it a lot better is that our HR teams were right there at the coalface with them, also helping them from an emotional perspective. COVID for everybody has been extremely traumatic. There's not a single person in this world that has not been affected by COVID. Everybody has, and in some way, line managers, they have to deal with employees passing away, employees sick. Yes, but that previously that was few and far between. And then when an employee got sick, we bring in HR, etc., and we resolve the issue. But now we're having to deal with employees getting sick, having to arrange testing. We set up mobile testing stations, etc., at our plants. We are a food producer. We need to be extremely cautious. We take the health of our people extremely seriously. And for us as an organization, it was really about helping our line managers to deal with this emotionally. Because if they're able to deal with it emotionally, they're also able to support their teams a lot better. And that's when the care comes in, because they know how. They know what to do. Now they were able to say, okay, I understand the situation. I'm more empathetic. How do I then approach the situation? And we've put in a lot of, we spared no cost in terms of providing our line managers with the tools, check-in sessions, etc., even our HR teams, to check in with employees to make sure that they are fine. We went to the extent of providing taxis and things like that for our people to be able to come to work. So it's really about checking in, are you actually okay, and providing them with the tools when they are not okay, and also saying it is okay to not be okay. It is okay to say I'm having a bad day. And when you provide that kind of an environment and giving your people the tools to become resilient, they're able to tackle those challenges a lot more easily.
Zana, I can see that those comments resonate very strongly for you. So from your perspective, in particular, advising Eskom's leadership faculty, How do you believe line managers should be leading this transformational change?
Thank you, Arthur. I think the first thing that we realized is that line managers' intention is there to do something different. They just don't know what exactly it is that they need to do and how they need to step up. And whilst we were having qualitative conversations with different line managers, something that also resonated with us is that, and it's a famous quote also by Alvin Toffler that talks about, it's not the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those that cannot read and write, but those that cannot unlearn, relearn, in order to do differently. And we've realized that there's a lot of practices that our leaders need to unlearn, and they need to relearn new practices in order for them to connect better with employees. So some of the things that we've done is that we have provided our leaders with short toolkits, so that they can do dipsticks with their employees to understand to what degree are people coping, to what degree are people actually okay. And one of the tools, for example, is the very short dipstick that they can do on Microsoft Teams. They can run a poll, something called a direction, alignment, and commitment short questionnaire that they can do to understand the degree to which people believe they have direction in their department. So is there a purpose? Is there intent? Based on all the shifting landscape parts that people are experiencing every day. Secondly, to what degree do people believe that they are aligned and they're all moving towards the same goal? And in terms of commitment, what is the energy levels of the employee in the team? And to do that frequently so that they can also have a very easy dipstick for themselves that gives them an automated score at the end, and they can work with something just to see where their employees are at. What we found quite interesting recently is that as part of our culture change journey, we do employee health checks, every quarter. In the last 2 quarters, there was a deliberate shift in the way that employees respond. So initially, it would have been about direction and decision making and the platform to integrate. Now it's about, does my leader actually have an interest in how I am doing? So what we decided to do is we decided to have conversations with employees amongst themselves and leaders that we facilitate, where the leader literally just connects with the employees and to check how is their well-being, what's happening in their space. And the shift in the response in that health check report has been immense in terms of the appreciation of employees and really appreciating the fact that leaders connect with them, not about work and not about targets, but just connecting with them in terms of who they are. And from that point of view, what we've seen is there's also been a shift in performance because of that. So because they're scared, because there's appreciation, I'm also going to make sure that I still do what is expected of me. In terms of managing performance in a different way, to have more regular check-ins. Do you understand what is expected of you? Are there any other skills and resources that you require? In terms of tools for the leaders specifically, we have noticed it's not only about the leadership conversation, it's also about equipping the leader with specific tools on Microsoft Teams. That's the platform that we utilize within our organization, of how they can collaborate better. So we would, for example, have a section within our development program where we teach leaders certain tips and tricks on how to navigate Microsoft Teams more effectively in order to increase collaboration and engagement. So how do you create a breakaway room? How do you get people back from the breakaway room into the main session? How do you run a poll on Microsoft Teams? How do you use Mentimeter, for example, to get different views anonymously into the room? So different views, short video clips that could be utilized to be the platform to evoke certain conversation. So we try and give them as many short bursts of learnings in terms of tools that they can utilize. That is quite easy. Something simplistic as a timer that they want to utilize on Google, so that if they give them a 20-minute break, then people can on their screen see when they need to return. And it's not rocket science, it's the small things. And it's almost as if we had to go back to basics. And we had to, shelve all the fancy stuff that we usually do and go back to basics and say, let's see, what is it that we can do that will really make an impact in the way that we collaborate with employees. And I think that was a key learning for us, is that we really need to start there and emphasize on the things that's easy enough for them to do, but will make a big impact into the short, medium, and long term with regards to remote working. And as we see that remote working will probably be here for a very long time. So It's stuff that we need to implement now so that we can reap the benefits over a long period. Thanks, Arthur.
Those are such powerful insights, Marzan. It ties in with one of my unfavorite stories about how organizations are dealing with a pandemic. There's a major organization, in fact, several major organizations that have had a massive focus on monitoring their employees' productivity. But the measure that they use is how much time and attention the employees are devoting to their work. So they actually measure the extent to which they're at their computer and focused on the screen, which always struck me as highly destructive. So listening to you talking about the combination of measuring, but also of supporting, gives me some hope that these organizations will come to their senses. But in that context, I'd like to ask Rob to come in here on that very topic. Rob, given this discussion, how do you believe the performance of employees should be measured by management?
Thanks, Arthur. So, yeah, I think the first thing, I mean, from an HR point of view, you know, we have skills libraries, and my one feeling is the new skill needs to be added there is to work remotely. There's a skill involved in working remotely, which comprises of many things. I mean, I used the example. I started work, you know, when the pandemic came out, Oracle sent one email out and 140,000 people started working from home overnight. And we started working from home. And later on in the year, I started talking about, I don't work from home any longer. I'm now living at work, because now I have a diary that's a 24/7 diary. And it's very dangerous because there's now this gray area. I mean, a good example is earlier this week, I had a bit of the flu. Instead of taking a sick day off, what did I do? I lay down and I came to my study to attend the meetings I was scheduled to attend. So you don't even get a sick day off any longer because, you know, this whole thing about these meetings there, I need to attend them. So the one good thing that I like, and I know I'm not, you know, I was talking about the line manager skills earlier. Line managers are employees as well. So they should be also, you know, undergoing these stresses, but it's how they react to it. As an employee, as part of a team, if a line person, the manager says, well, I'm sorry, 5:30 this afternoon is the only time we can get together for the team for our normal 2-hour meeting, that's just not acceptable. And, you know, line managers need to be told that. Getting to the managing of the performance, you know, before the pandemic, working from home to me was the concept of, I will give you my 8 hours, but my home situation determines how I'm going to give them to you. I've got, you know, if I've got kids at school and concerts and sport, I'll give you 4 hours in the morning, I'll give you 4 hours in the evening. That was the concept of working from home. Today, that's changed, but the measurement shouldn't have. I'm here to do a job and working from home. So don't think that I'm going to be available for a meeting from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, because the concept was, no, you know, my kids or whatever do sporting activities in the afternoon. That's why I work from home. But guess what? From 8 o'clock in the evening, when they're all in bed, that's when I give you quality time. So time has got nothing to do with it. You know, the actual time. I mean, it's a good time to move to, you've got a job to do. I need to measure your outputs. I need to start measuring your value within the organization. Those should be the metrics. And that's why I talk about our line guys don't have the skills to do that. You know, they're either measuring timesheets or they've got these nebulous goals, you know, customer satisfaction. Well, what does that mean? Yeah, start looking at things where we can actually measure, where we agree on how you're going to measure me. What do I need to achieve? What tasks do I need to do to achieve that? Now I can get to grips with it. But, you know, I keep going back to the point of, you know, I think employees are stressed, overworked, over-Zoomed, over-teamed, you know, Microsoft Teams. It's becoming too much. And it's going to break in the end. It's going to break where, and this is why organizations have to evolve. You know, before, when I went to work at Oracle's offices, there was a coffee area. We always, as a group, went down and had lunch at the canteen. I think it took me 6 months at home to say, actually, no, I need to go sit on my veranda and eat my lunch. Eating lunch while I'm carrying on with emails and meetings has got to stop. It's a discipline. And those are the skills we need to give to the employees to enact, but to give the skill to the managers to say, understand the pressures your employees are going under. And I like the work you use about destructive, Arthur, because it is destructive. Because I'm putting in more and more hours because, you know, driving to work was not working. I was listening to music, a podcast or something. Now I'm working from 7 o'clock in the morning. So my actual productivity, I should be producing more, I'm doing more hours, but there's a burnout capacity component coming here. And, this is where we say, from an organization's evolving, you've got to look at this thing holistically. It's not, we've sent everybody home. Yes, they had to get notebooks. They had to get VPN access and secure. That's past. Now it's the nitty gritty of how does the organization operate effectively.
Thanks, Rob. I'd be fascinated to hear what the experience is on the ground. Ronnie, you obviously visit numerous of these organizations virtually, mostly, I assume. But the question is, what are you picking up? Do you believe that organizations have overcome these new HR challenges, or do you see these ongoing challenges for 2021 and beyond in terms of the systems that they are embracing and look like they are going to embrace in terms of your pipeline?
So I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's been a transition that we've gone through, but I think a lot of what has actually happened with speaking to different organizations is that they've looked at things in a light of something that should have been happening all the time, but hasn't. And what they're doing now is that they're going back and saying, all of these things that we should have been doing, we now have to do. We don't have an alternative anymore, but to start doing these things. And the area then becomes, how do we start doing these things? So although we talk about this as being the result of the pandemic and the lockdown and the not being able to do these things, these are things that we should be doing all the time. And I think, right from the start, we said, this has caused a change, but the change in my mind has been for the good, because a lot of things that we weren't doing, that we should have been doing, are now being done. So, if there's any lining, on this cloud that we have above us, is that we've actually gone back to what we should have been doing all along. So from that perspective, I'm looking at this and saying, I would hope that 2021 and beyond is not going to be different in terms of how we're managing and what it is that we're actually doing. And that evolution is an evolution that doesn't go back to the way we were. I don't think that is an option for anybody anymore. And a lot of the people that I'm speaking to from organizations are saying, so how do we as an organization adapt? Do we have that flexibility? Do we have that agility to be able to do this? And if we don't, what are the things that we're going to need to do? So it starts looking at, and Mazan touched on it a little bit, around the whole reskilling of people and changing how we actually do things and what it is that we're actually doing. And that's a big thing. And I think a lot of organizations and most organizations that I speak to, when you go through a crisis of one form or another, whether it's financial, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a downturn in economy, whatever the case may be, one of the first areas that gets impacted is learning and development. People say we can't afford to send people on training. And realistically, this is the time, and I think you touched, Mazan, you touched on the fact that you are spending a lot more time, and I think Mandusha did as well, a lot more time training people. This is the ideal time when your productivity, you're not able to produce as much because of the circumstances. This is the ideal time to teach your people, upskill them, give them new skills that they can use, teach them how to do team meetings or Zoom meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And you're finding a lot of organizations are cutting back on that and saying, we can't afford to train our people. My question is, can you afford not to? Because if you are not providing that flexibility and that growth opportunity, you will suffer the consequences of that in the long term.
Thank you, Ronnie. I'm going to put the last question before we go to the audience questions to Mandusha and Marzan, to ask both of you to tell me from your perspective, do you believe that the way I work today is now the new normal or only a temporary response to the pandemic? Firstly, Mandusha.
Absolutely. This is the new normal. The only thing that's going to be constant is change. And once again, whether we survive or not, our organization is really going to be whether we're able to respond to the changes quickly enough.
Marzan?
Thank you, Arthur. Definitely, this is the new way. an interesting survey that we recently launched on the future of work to determine employees' appetite to work remotely into the future, and what are the pros and what are the cons for them at a personal level. It resulted in some interesting findings. So firstly, most of the employees within our organization indicated that they would like to work in a hybrid model going forward. So in some instances have the flexibility of working at home, but then also have the opportunity to go into the office environment as and when required. So that was the key preference from employees. But also in terms of a cost perspective, an interesting finding from the research that was recently conducted within our organization is that our organization by itself would have a potential cost saving of 2.5 billion rand over the next 5 years if remote working is implemented. And that is really mostly based on rental agreements in terms of buildings that we have to rent for employees to be office bound, and also in terms of traveling costs. And just from an employee's personal pocket perspective, an average potential cost saving of 45,000 Rand more or less per employee, and a saving time of 11 days per annum if you're not on the road, if you travel approximately between 50 and 60 kilometers to the office and back every day. So just with that, employees' appetite in terms of being more flexible, being more agile, but also the cost-saving component is literally almost the ideal platform for employees to grab the opportunity and say, how can we make this work? Teach me the skills, teach me the tools, give us, let me go through my own process of self-discovery in order to make sure that I am equipped with the right mindset so that I can work wherever I need to be. So definitely I think that will be the way that we will operate into the future. Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you. And that ties in beautifully to one of the first comments made by an audience member. More a comment, but ties into a question as well. Lilani says, it's about marrying EQ, emotional quotient, with the use of technology. We're not going back to 2019, which feels like 7 years ago, doesn't it just? More than ever, says Lilani, self-awareness, especially for leadership, is critical. And then really tying in with that, Karen Strauss asks, what do you think is the deep motivation and internal drive that drives Tiger Brands' employee behavior? That's a question for you, Mandusha.
I think it's a couple of things. It's our, like I said at the very beginning, the deep motivation and drive is our loyalty to our country. We, like I said, we very, very proudly South African, and that's the kind of culture that we have within the organization. So our mission is we talk about nourishing and nurturing more lives every single day. So we take that extremely seriously in everything that we do. How do we make a difference in the lives of the people that we are here to serve? So very much internally, that holds very true in the sense of every single action is really focused on making the lives of our people better. And in turn, because our people feel valued, they feel treated like human beings. They're not just a number. You don't have to, bully people and tell people what they actually need to do. We treat people like adults. They understand what is going on and they get on with it. And with that, when people are treated well, it resonates with them, and that's what it shows in everything that they do. And putting the consumer first, because we are 13,000 people strong. That's 13,000 consumers as well. So understanding the needs of our people also help us to understand our consumers, and that really, really drives them to really make a difference in each and every person's life. Our people worked 24 hours during the lockdown to make sure that the stores never ever ran short of Tiger Brands products. So it's very deep seated, that sense of loyalty and commitment, not just to the country but to the company and to making a difference.
That seems to be a deep concern among our audience. and leads to the next question for you, Marzan, from Bronson Mokabela, who says, what are organizations doing to check in with their staff or employees to ensure that they're coping with this current way of working? In the past, we could do team building activities. What's being done now?
Great question. Thank you. I think that the key thing that our employer and also our leaders are currently doing is to have more regular check-ins. So have qualitative conversation. Not only once a month or once a quarter, like I mentioned previously, but to have conversation about, you know, what's happening in the individual's life in terms of all the different balls that they have to juggle. And like I said earlier as well, time has become so fluid that you're trying to incorporate all your things around home life and work life into one. So instead of just running an annual survey to understand to what degree people are engaged, the survey is not for me the way to go anymore. We have a shifting landscape that is shifting literally every day of the week. Things are changing, things are happening at a very rapid pace. We know that the world that we live in, how fast technology is changing, and how fast decisions are being overridden and overturned, and employees have to be agile. So what's happening now is that a current practice that we've instilled and we're encouraging our leaders to adapt to is to have weekly check-in meetings with their employees. But I'm looking at I'm thinking of the way that leaders and employees connect with one another. The amount of voice notes that people send between one another just to check in, and I heard you went to the doctor, are you okay? And just an immediate response. Whereas in the past, when we were office bound, you know, we found that it was playing out differently. The employee had to take formal leave for the day and then had to come back the next day, and then the leader or the manager would ask, you know, how are things? Or, you know, now it's just literally, you know, picking up the phone. So it's almost as if the connectivity has become better, in my view. But still, our leaders need tools. They want to know what is the tips and the tricks that they can use to create more connectivity with the people within the team specifically. But it's definitely more frequent. And instead of doing our annual surveys, we ask our leaders to do weekly check-ins. And if there's any issues arising, then obviously we have the different channels in which they can then, you know, engage with employee aid programs or other support staff or counseling, whatever it might be, because there's a real need for that at the moment. And it's almost as if you don't know what you don't know if you don't ask. So you need to ask in order to channel the person in your team to the right person that could assist them at a professional level. So there's definitely continuous conversation happening in that space. Thanks, Arthur.
Such sage advice. But talking about tools, we now approaching, as everyone knows, obviously the first year of the pandemic, and people are going to realize that the temporary solutions that they set up in their homes are going to become semi-permanent. So a question from Werner Grundling for you, Rob. It would be interesting to see if employers, other than supplying computers, etc., also start assisting employees to create effective workplaces at home. They've invested heavily in ergonomic office spaces, but how does the environment at home look, Rob?
Thanks, Arthur. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, at a forum I had, I was speaking at a different forum, and our HR manager was actually on the podium, was with me, and I said to him, my office at home is quite uncomfortable. Can I get an expense in air conditioner? Because I have air conditioning at the office. And I was doing it tongue in cheek, but absolutely that. I mean, we took for granted facilities available at the office that we don't have. You know, whether it was the gym, printing facilities, high-speed networks, etc. So organizations need to look at that. We heard about the savings, Marzan was speaking about the savings organizations can make. They have to look at this and say, we need to invest some of this into our workforce. You know, having a fiber line at home is now part and parcel of, like a notebook and a mobile phone became de facto tools of the trade. 20 years ago, they weren't tools of the trade. You know, specific people got them. Today, everybody who joins an organization gets some form of computing power. So this is just an extension of that. Because from an employee's point of view, I think some employees are feeling hard done by. You know, I used to be able to go to the gym at the office. Now I've got to go and pay to go to gym. So, and the office isn't paying for that. So, you know, what's my cut in this? So organizations need to really look at this. So, as part of this evolution is, when I bring employees on board now, these are the questions recruits, people going through the recruitment process are going to ask. What do you offer your employees? I mean, a good example was, first thing Oracle said, we just moved into our new building there at Whitney, that beautiful building. We hadn't been there for a year. But Oracle said, we invested a huge amount of money in this ergonomic furniture. Please go and fetch it to go and put it at your home. Or if it's not feasible, go and purchase. Because Oracle very early, I think, saw this was not temporary. This is the new way of working. Oracle, in fact, made a statement. Larry Ellison, our chairman, made a statement a couple of months ago to say, this is how we're going to be working from now on. This is no longer linked to the pandemic. This is how we're going to work. So now we need to don't think of this as temporary any longer. But organizations need to think about what do they do for the employees, from a facilitating this office. It's like I said to our HR manager as well. Make sure you send every employee a letter stating you've requested them to work from home, because they're going to require that for their tax return, because SARS requires that. Don't wait for employees to ask for it, issue it. Because because they're going to get the benefit of that because they've used house space as part of the work environment. So, it's a different way of thinking. It's not just pockets of skills and how I do things. And that's why I use this term of the evolving organization. I've got to look at everything.
So it's fascinating to hear what Oracle is doing, but Tony Pays asks the question more broadly. And for you, Ronnie, are organizations assisting employees to set up comfortable workstations?
So I certainly can speak from an Oracle perspective like Rob did. They've tried to make it as close to my work environment as I can, providing me with the option of getting my office chair, providing me with a stand for my PC, providing me with all the tools that I need from that perspective. So from our perspective, I think they are. From what I've heard from Mandusha, I think they're doing that at Tiger as well. So I think the trend is that organizations are looking at this. The concern that I have, which goes along with what Rob is saying, is that organizations, as Marzan said, are looking at the cost savings and how effective this is going to be and how this is going to allow us as an organization to continue, but at what expense? If your employee engagement is going down because they don't have what they need from an ergonomic perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, from being able to perform properly, there's a cost attached to that as well. And there needs to be that sort of balancing. And I think that's the concern that organizations need to be focusing themselves on. Is it's all good and well to say, that we're saving millions and billions of rands, but how effectively are we using that to maintain the employee engagement that we're expecting to have? Employees, and I think right at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about the emotional changes that people have gone through as a result of this last year, the pandemic, the lockdown, and whatever the case may be. And if you're adding additional pressure on those employees by forcing them into situations where they are uncomfortable in their working environment because they don't have the right tools and facilities, I think you're going to experience problems there. So I would certainly encourage organizations to speak to their employees to find out exactly what is it that will help you to do your job more effectively and to actually feel as if you are contributing towards the organization in some form or another. So that would be what I would look at. The other thing, we've been focusing a lot on, what line managers need to be doing and what HR needs to be doing in the organization. And I think to a large extent, some of that responsibility needs to go to the employee as well, where the employee, you were talking about having weekly conversations, that line managers and leaders need to have with their employees. I think that needs to be driven from an employee perspective, where the employee says, hey guys, I've got a problem. I need to spend time talking to you. I need to discuss with you my performance and what are the issues that I'm experiencing and things like that. And I think quite honestly, the onus needs to shift to the employee rather than, we have this view that HR is a waste of time in an organization. All they do is impose laws and regulations and all sorts of things like that. But it's all to add value. What needs to happen is that the responsibility for looking at those things. So as Rob said, would I be able to go and purchase myself an air conditioner? It needs to come from the employees. They need to drive that. And you're going to get that where you have engaged employees where they feel comfortable having that communication. And I think, that is a trend that we need to start pushing through our organizations, through the conversations that we're actually having, is that it needs to be employee driven.
Fascinating. Our final question is one for both Mandusha and Marzan, and it comes from Stephen Price, who wants to know, have you observed any differences in how remote working and the pandemic more broadly has impacted your office employees versus your non-office employees? In other words, employees based at a plant or a manufacturing site. Mandusha, that in particular should be a fascinating question for you to answer.
I think there is a difference in terms of how the pandemic has affected employees who are now working from home, as well as employees who are site-based. Employees who are site-based are having to deal with a very real challenge of how do I get to work every single day in a safe manner. I'm taking public transport, etc. I'm coming into the office and I'm interacting on site with a number of people. I'm having to also undergo every day a number of safety protocols. You come in, there's a number of checks, etc., that need to be done before I even enter the premises. And then also, you come into work, and then today one of your colleagues is not there because they have fallen sick or they have passed away, and that's a very real challenge to have to deal with. I mean, we've also had a couple of instances where people unfortunately have passed away at the office, non-COVID related, but real traumas of seeing your colleagues actually passing away at the office. So it's very real. It's that fear of, I'm coming to work, will I get infected, etc. And of course, employees who are then working from home don't have the challenge of having to take public transport. They can, to a large extent, isolate themselves. But I use isolation twofold, because also working from home can be very lonely because I don't have that contact, that personal contact. Yes, I'm seeing Marzan over the on a video call, but I'm not seeing her as I would see her, where we both go and have a cup of coffee. Also, then you hearing about your colleagues that are passing away. It's very lonely because you're not there to lend a hand and to support your colleagues who are there at the plant. So it's a very different and then adjusting to working from home. And I just wanted to build a little bit, use the opportunity to build on what Ronnie was saying. In terms of the way we've communicated to our organization, we've communicated to leaders as well as employees that there's a responsibility on both parties. Don't just wait for your leader to actually pick up the phone and ask you how's it going. If you're not feeling so great, then pick up the phone, speak to someone, reach out. So we've created also a lot of those tips which we've given to our organization to say, please, you're welcome to do this. We encourage you to do this. And, we find a lot of people setting up coffee chats and things like that virtually. You just get those calls and we're having a merry old chat. When meetings start, we have protocols in terms of the first 15 minutes is actually checking in with people just to see how you are as a person. And if that goes on even longer, then that's okay. We get.
Sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there because we have about a minute to go. And so, Marzan, I'm going to ask you in one sentence to tell us, because I suspect what Mandusha is saying applies broadly to plant and manufacturing environments. But in one sentence, Marzan, what is your advice to people wrestling with this issue broadly? What's your single key tip to any organizational leadership?
I think the key thing is that change happens one person at a time. We need to meet our employees where they are at, one person at a time. The one-size-fit-all approach, those days are gone. We need to customize the way that we do things, and leaders and employees need to understand that. It's not a one-size-fit-all. In order to build resilience, you need to customize your solution so that you have the necessary platforms to utilize in order to start doing and thinking differently into the future. Thanks, Arthur.
That's a great finishing message. Thanks so much. I couldn't say it better. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. The recorded session will be available on the Business Day Focus 4.0 website if you need to absorb all of this insight in your own time. And further information will be provided to you by email. A special thank you to Oracle for their partnership in this event. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, and good luck out there. Good luck in the second year of the pandemic. Goodbye.